It was a crisp autumn morning in Tallahassee, Florida. The city was waking up with the early sunlight casting golden hues over the tree-lined streets. Yet, in a modest, rundown corner of the city lived a man whose life was as weathered as the house he called home. Harold "Red" Williams, a 100-year-old military veteran, sat at a small, wobbly desk in the corner of his dimly lit room. The walls, lined with yellowing photographs of his younger years, bore witness to a lifetime of sacrifice and service. His hands, shaking with age and a lifetime of labor, carefully unfolded a piece of paper. The weight of the letter he was about to write was not lost on him. Harold had fought in World War II, proudly serving his country as a young man, but now, decades later, he found himself alone and homeless, living in a dilapidated trailer on the outskirts of town. His only companions were his memories and a series of government benefits that barely covered his basic needs. But it wasn't just the cold that gnawed at him, it was the land. For years, Harold had watched as new developments sprouted around him, wealthy businessmen acquiring parcels of land left and right, pushing out the few remaining veterans like himself who had nowhere else to go. He had been offered a meager sum for his plot of land, which he had inherited from his father, but he refused. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. It was about honoring his service and the sacrifices that had been made by men and women like him. He had heard of Pam Bondi, the current Attorney General of the United States, a woman whose reputation for fighting for the underdog was well known across the country. He had no idea if she would even read his letter, but in that moment Harold felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, someone in power could see beyond the bureaucratic red tape and offer him a lifeline. He put pen to paper. Dear Attorney General Pam Bondi, I am writing to you today as a man who has lived a full life, yet I find myself in a position I never imagined. I am a 100-year-old veteran of World War II, and for many years now, I have been struggling to hold onto a piece of land that has been in my family for generations. It is not just land to me, it is my heritage, my history, and the last thing I have left of my family. The world around me has changed, and it seems that those who have the most power continue to take what little we have left. I am not asking for much, just the chance to live in peace for my remaining days, without fear that someone will come and take what is rightfully mine. I ask for your help, your understanding, and your compassion. With respect, Harold "Red" Williams. Harold sat back in his chair, his heart heavy with the weight of the words he had written. This was his last stand. His last attempt to reclaim the dignity that he felt had been stripped away from him over the years. He sealed the envelope and, with great effort, wrote the address, Pam Bondi, Attorney General, United States. The letter would be sent, but Harold didn't know if it would even reach its destination. He didn't know if anyone would care. All he knew was that it was his last hope. The letter sat in Pam Bondi's office for nearly a week. The daily grind of government bureaucracy and legal cases often buried the most heartfelt pleas under stacks of paperwork. However, this particular letter caught the attention of one of Pam's senior aides. The handwriting on the envelope was elegant, though shaky, a reminder of the man's age. The words, though humble, resonated deeply. A veteran's plea for help was not something that could be ignored. Pam herself had always prided herself on standing up for those who couldn't fight for themselves. She had built a reputation in the legal world by advocating for victims of abuse, for families who had lost everything, and for the elderly who often became invisible in a society obsessed with youth. This letter, from a 100-year-old military veteran, was exactly the kind of cause that she had devoted her career to. After reading the letter, Pam sat back in her chair. It was rare for her to feel personally affected by the many cases that crossed her desk, but this one was different. She could almost see the wrinkled hands of the old man as he wrote his words, his battle-worn heart laid bare in each sentence. Pam made a decision. She would not let this letter go unanswered. She instructed her team to contact Harold Williams immediately and to get the details of his land dispute. Within hours, the first response from the Attorney General's office was on its way to Harold. Harold, sitting in his modest home, had almost forgotten about the letter. He spent his days tending to his small vegetable garden and reminiscing about the days when he had been part of something bigger, when he was a soldier with a purpose. The sound of his old landline ringing interrupted his thoughts. He wasn't expecting any calls, especially not from Washington, D.C. Hello, he croaked into the receiver, his voice rough from years of little use. Mr. Williams, the voice on the other end was polite but urgent. This is Sarah from the Attorney General's office. I'm calling in response to your letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi. We've received your correspondence and we want to help. For a moment, Harold didn't speak. He wasn't sure if this was a prank or if his mind was playing tricks on him. He had written that letter in desperation, but this was real. He wasn't sure what to say. The last time anyone had reached out to him like this was when he'd been a young soldier receiving orders for a mission. I didn't expect a response, Harold finally said, his voice shaky. We understand. We want to assure you that your situation is being taken seriously, Sarah replied. We've already begun looking into the land acquisition that's been happening in your area, and we'll be arranging a visit to assess your case. Attorney General Bondi is personally overseeing it. Harold felt a weight lift off his chest. He could hardly believe it. The government was taking him seriously. The thought of Pam Bondi herself getting involved gave him hope he hadn't felt in years. The next day, a team from the Attorney General's office arrived at Harold's property. They were met by an elderly man with a back bent from years of labor, but his eyes were sharp, filled with the determination of someone who had fought for his country and, in his mind, for what was rightfully his. They toured the land together, listening to Harold recount the memories of his family and the life he had lived on this land. He spoke of his father, a hard-working farmer who had passed on the plot to him after returning from World War I. This land was not just dirt and grass to Harold. It was his legacy, a symbol of everything he had fought for. As they walked, the team gathered notes and took photographs. The land developers had already been circling the area, offering Harold pennies on the dollar for what he knew was valuable property. His refusal to sell had only made them more persistent. Yet, despite their efforts, Harold had remained firm. At the end of the visit, one of the aides, a young woman named Emily, approached Harold. Mr. Williams, she said, her voice gentle but filled with resolve. We are going to fight for you. This land should never have been taken from you, and we will do everything we can to make sure you can live out your days here in peace. Harold blinked, overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers. It was more than he had expected, more than he had hoped for. 3 days after the Attorney General's team visited Harold's land, something unexpected happened. Pam Bondi, moved by Harold's story and the injustice he faced, decided to share his letter during a live national press conference. She didn't reveal his full name for privacy but read parts of the letter to America. This is not just a land dispute, she said, her voice firm but emotional. This is about how we treat our heroes, our veterans who gave everything for this country and now find themselves overlooked and displaced. The news clip exploded across networks. Within hours, the story of the 100-year-old World War II veteran fighting to save his ancestral land from corporate acquisition was front-page news. Social media lit up with hashtags like #HonorHarold and #VetlandJustice, with thousands of people sharing the story and voicing their support. Across America, people from all walks of life, veterans, families, even celebrities began to speak out. Donations poured into veteran legal defense funds. Talk shows picked up the story. Harold's quiet life in Tallahassee was suddenly surrounded by media vans, flashing cameras, and local supporters holding signs reading, "Let Red Stay." Harold, though overwhelmed, remained humble. I didn't write that letter to be famous, he said during a local news interview, his voice cracking. I just wanted to be left alone on the land my father gave me. That's all. Despite the media circus, there was an important battle still being fought behind the scenes. Pam Bondi's legal team uncovered shady practices by the land acquisition company trying to take Harold's property. The developers had used loopholes and applied pressure on elderly residents in the area, quietly pushing them out for a major commercial real estate project. What they didn't count on was that one of those residents would fight back and that the Attorney General of the United States would take up his case. A federal investigation was launched into the company's land practices. Pam Bondi addressed the nation again just days later. We have found sufficient evidence of coercion, manipulation, and violations of veterans' property rights. Let it be known, this government stands with those who served. Mr. Williams will not be moved from his home. The courtroom hearing, set just a week later, became one of the most emotional events in recent memory. Veterans from all over the country flew in, lining the courthouse steps in uniform, saluting Harold as he was helped up the stairs by 2 Marines. Pam Bondi herself stood by Harold as the case was presented. The room fell silent when the judge finally spoke. This court finds that Mr. Harold Williams is the rightful and protected owner of the property in question. All acquisition efforts are hereby halted. This court also recommends a congressional inquiry into predatory land acquisitions targeting our nation's elderly and veteran populations. As those words echoed through the chamber, the courtroom erupted. Some clapped. Many cried. And Harold, old, tired, but filled with renewed pride, bowed his head in gratitude. Outside, the crowd chanted his name. Pam Bondi leaned over and whispered, "You did it, Harold. You did more than save your land. You reminded America what honor looks like." Harold smiled. "I wasn't trying to be a hero, ma'am. Just an old man trying to keep his memories." The days following the courtroom victory were a whirlwind. Harold's story wasn't just a trending moment, it became a movement. From Washington to small-town America, his story inspired conversations about forgotten heroes, elder rights, and corporate accountability. News anchors called it the stand of the century. Pam Bondi, in a speech at the Veterans of Foreign Wars (VFW) National Convention, spoke about Harold's resilience. "We've built highways, cities, and skyscrapers, but we must never forget the men and women whose hands built this nation first with rifles, hammers, and courage." Harold Williams is a reminder that bravery doesn't retire. Meanwhile, back in Tallahassee, Harold was struggling to process what his life had become. He was now a public figure. Letters from children across the country arrived daily, drawings of American flags, thank you notes, even handmade medals that said "Hero Forever." One note read, "Dear Mr. Harold, my daddy is in the Army too. He said you're what America should be. I want to be like you when I'm 100. Harold sat at his small dining table, glasses perched low on his nose, reading each one. Tears rolled down his cheeks, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming kindness of strangers. But perhaps the most heartwarming moment came when a school principal from Virginia called Pam Bondi's office and said, "Our students want to do something for Mr. Williams, something permanent." Within 2 weeks, a delegation of high school students arrived at Harold's home. With permission and planning, they began restoring his aging house, repainting, repairing the front porch, even planting a new garden bed where his old vegetables used to grow. One student, Jenna, barely 17, sat beside Harold one afternoon and asked, "Mr. Williams, did you ever think your story would change the country?" Harold chuckled softly. "Young lady, I barely thought my story would change the day." That same week, Pam Bondi visited him once more, this time without aides, cameras, or formalities. She simply wanted to see Harold and thank him in person, away from the glare of the world. She brought a gift, a framed, handwritten replica of the letter he had originally sent her. "I had this made," she said, handing it to him, "because 100 years from now, someone should still read these words." Harold's frail hands shook slightly as he held it. He studied his own handwriting as though looking at a relic from another lifetime. "You saved me," he said softly. "And I don't mean just from the land developers. You saved me from disappearing." Pam sat beside him. "No, Harold. You saved us from forgetting what truly matters." The two shared a quiet moment. No more speeches, no cameras. Just mutual respect between two people who had done something extraordinary together. Later that month, Congress announced the passing of the Veteran Property Protection Act, legislation inspired by Harold's case. It introduced new safeguards to prevent predatory land acquisitions targeting elderly veterans. It passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. And they named it after him, the Harold Williams Act. Harold watched the announcement from his living room, wrapped in a red, white, and blue quilt a neighbor had made for him. When the bill was signed into law, Pam Bondi gave a final remark. "For every veteran who was silenced, overlooked, or forgotten, this law is for you. And for the man who reminded us all, thank you, Mr. Williams." 3 months after the law was passed, something deeply poetic unfolded in Harold's quiet life. He was no longer just a veteran. He was a symbol. A living reminder that one voice, even from the most forgotten corner of America, could echo across an entire nation. On a crisp morning in October, a special ceremony was held at Arlington National Cemetery. Not for burial, but for honor. For the first time in over a decade, the Department of Defense was dedicating a special monument, not to a battle, not to a general, but to a single soldier's stand for justice. It was called the Sentinel Stone, and engraved on its surface were these words. 100 years. One voice. One letter. He reminded a nation of its promise. In honor of Sergeant Harold Red Williams, U.S. Army, World War II. Harold didn't attend the ceremony. He watched it from his front porch, wrapped in his military-issue jacket that still somehow fit after all these years. His eyes, sharp and misty, didn't miss a single detail on the screen. He gave a small salute to the TV, then whispered, "That's enough for one lifetime." The next morning, Harold didn't wake up. He passed peacefully in his sleep, with his letter to Pam Bondi framed above his bed and a folded American flag at his side. No pain, no fear, just silence and peace after 100 years of storms. The nation mourned. The news broke with the headline, Harold Red Williams, hero of the people, dies at 100. President Donald Trump delivered a formal tribute, stating, Sergeant Williams didn't just serve his country in war. He served it with dignity and peace. His stand has changed the lives of millions, and his legacy will live in the hearts of every American patriot. Pam Bondi was one of the pallbearers at his funeral, which took place in his hometown with full military honors. She wore a small pin on her coat, a replica of the Medal of Honor gifted to her by a veterans group for her role in Harold's fight. Over 3,000 people attended the funeral. But it wasn't the crowd that mattered. It was what they brought: handwritten notes, American flags, framed letters, drawings by children, all placed gently at Harold's grave like petals of gratitude. One letter from a 6-year-old boy stood out. It read, Dear Mr. Harold, I heard you saved your land and helped my grandpa too. Mommy said you're in heaven now. Tell God I said thank you for you. Pam Bondi stood silently beside Harold's headstone. No cameras, no media. Just her and the man who had started it all with a simple, heartfelt letter. She placed a single sunflower, Harold's favorite flower, on the stone. Rest well, soldier, she whispered. Your mission's complete. Back at the Department of Justice, a framed photo now hangs in Pam Bondi's office. It's not of the courtroom, not of a bill signing, but of Harold sitting on his porch, smiling with his American flag in the background and his letter in hand. Above it, a plaque reads, Let no voice be forgotten. Let no hero be left behind. And so the story of Harold Red Williams became part of the American soul, not for the battles he fought on foreign soil, but for the quiet, courageous one he fought at home. He didn't just win his land back. He won back America's conscience.